The German Ideology, 1845. Part 1, Feuerbach, Opposition of the Materialist and Idealist Outlook. A. Idealism and Materialism. 3. Production and Intercourse. Division of labor and forms of property, tribal, ancient, feudal. The relations of different nations among themselves depend upon the extent to which each has developed its productive forces, the division of labor and internal intercourse. This statement is generally recognized, but not only the relation of one nation to others, but also the whole internal structure of the nation itself depends on the stage of development reached by its production and its internal and external intercourse. How far the productive forces of a nation are developed is shown most manifestly by the degree to which the division of labor has been carried. Each new productive force, insofar as it is not merely a quantitative extension of productive forces already known, for instance, the bringing into cultivation of fresh land, causes the further development of the division of labor. The division of labor inside a nation leads at first to the separation of industrial and commercial from agricultural labor, and hence to the separation of town and country, and to the conflict of their interests. Its further development leads to the separation of commercial from industrial labor. At the same time, through the division of labor inside these various branches, there develop various divisions among the individuals cooperating in definite kinds of labor. The relative position of these individual groups is determined by the methods employed in agriculture, industry, and commerce. Patriarchalism, slavery, estates, classes. These same conditions are to be seen, given a more developed intercourse and the relations of different nations to one another. The various stages of development and the division of labor are just so many different forms of ownership, i.e., the existing stage and the division of labor determines also the relations of individuals to one another with reference to the material, instrument, and product of labor. The first form of ownership is tribal, stamagentu, ownership. It corresponds to the undeveloped stage of production, at which a people lives by hunting and fishing, by the rearing of beasts, or, in the highest stage, agriculture. In the latter case, it presupposes a great mass of all uncultivated stretches of land. The division of labor is at this stage still very elementary and is confined to a further extension of the natural division of labor existing in the family. The social structure is, therefore, limited to an extension of the family, patriarchal family, chieftains, below them the members of the tribe, finally slaves. The slavery latent in the family only develops gradually, with the increase of population, the growth of wants, and with the extension of external relations, both of war and of barter. The second form is the ancient communal and state ownership, which proceeds especially from the union of several tribes into a city by agreement or by conquest, and which is still accompanied by slavery. Beside communal ownership, we already find movable, and later also immovable, private property developing, but as an abnormal form subordinate to communal ownership. The citizens hold power over their laboring slaves only in their community, and on the account alone, therefore, they are bound to the form of communal ownership. It is the communal private property which compels the active citizens to remain in the spontaneously derived form of association over against their slaves. For this reason, the whole structure of society based on this communal ownership, and with it the power of the people, decays in the same measure as, in particular, immovable private property immovable private property evolves. The division of labor is already more developed. We already find the antagonism of town and country, later the antagonism between those states which represent town interests and those which represent country interests. And inside the towns themselves, the antagonism between industry and maritime commerce. The class relation between citizens and slaves is now completely developed. With the development of private property, we find here for the first time the same conditions which we shall find again, only on a more extensive scale, with modern private property. On the one hand, the concentration of private property, which began very early in Rome, as the Licinian agrarian law proves, and proceeded very rapidly from the time of the civil wars and especially under the emperors. On the other hand, coupled with this, the transformation of the plebeian small peasantry into the proletariat, which, however, owing to its intermediate position between propertied citizens and slaves, never achieved an independent development. The third form of ownership is feudal or estate property. If antiquity started out from the town and its little territory, the Middle Ages started out from the country. This different starting point was determined by sparseness of the population at that time, which was scattered over a large area and which received no large increase from the conquerors. Rome, feudal development at the outset, therefore, extends over a much wider territory, prepared by the Roman conquests and the spread of agriculture at first associated with it. The last centuries of the declining Roman Empire and its conquest by the barbarians destroyed a number of productive forces. Agriculture had declined. Industry had decayed for want of a market. Trade had died out or been violently suspended. The rural and urban population had decreased. From these conditions and the mode of organization of the conquest determined by them, feudal property developed under the influence of the Germanic military constitution. Like tribal and communal ownership, it is based again on a community, but the direct producing class standing over against it is not, as in the case of the ancient community, the slaves, but the enserfed, small peasantry. As soon as feudalism is fully developed, there also arises antagonism to the towns, the hierarchical structure of land ownership, and the armed bodies of retainers associated with it gave the nobility power over the serfs. This feudal organization was, just as much as the ancient communal ownership, an association against the subjected producing class, but the form of association and the relation to the direct producers were different because of the different conditions of production. This feudal system of land ownership had its counterpart in the towns in the shape of corporative property, the feudal organization of trades. Here, property consisted chiefly in the labor of each individual person, the necessity for association against the organized robber nobility, the need for communal covered markets and age when the industrialist was at the same time a merchant, the growing competition of the escaped serfs swarming into the rising towns, the feudal structure of the whole country. These combined to bring about the guilds. They gradually accumulated small capital of individual craftsmen and their stable numbers, as against the growing population, evolved the relation of journeyman and apprentice, which brought into being in the towns of a hierarchy similar to that in the country. Thus, the chief form of property during the feudal epoch consisted on the one hand of landed property with a serf, labor chained to it, and on the other of the labor of the individuals, with small capital commanding the labor of journeymen. The organization of both was determined by the restricted conditions of production, the small scale and primitive cultivation of the land, and the craft type of industry. There was little division of labor in the heyday of feudalism. Each country bore in itself the antithesis of town and country. The division into estates was certainly strongly marked, but apart from the differentiation of princes, nobility, clergy, and peasants in the country, and masters, journeymen, apprentices, and soon also the rabble of casual laborers, in the towns, no division of importance took place. In agriculture, it was rendered difficult by the strip system, beside which the cottage industry of the peasants themselves emerged. In industry, there was no division of labor at all in the individual trades themselves, and very little between them. The separation of industry and commerce was found already in existence in older towns. In the newer, it only developed later, when the towns entered into mutual relations. The grouping of larger territories into feudal kingdoms was a necessity for the landed nobility as for the towns. The organization of the ruling class, the nobility, had, therefore, everywhere a monarch at its head.